Well, I propose that we start. And I know more people will connect in, but I want to make sure that we're making the best use of time possible with the 2 hours that we have. Once again, welcome, good afternoon. You are participating in a roundtable that has been convened by the California Department of Toxic Substances Control, or called DTSC for short. And we're just so appreciative that you are spending your valuable time with us here this afternoon. This is one of 2 roundtables, and this roundtable is focusing on discovery and enforcement of contaminated dry cleaning facilities, which is one of the programs under the new Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative. And I'm very pleased to introduce, to get us started off today, the director of DTSC, Dr. Meredith Williams, who is here to provide some context and get us started. Dr. Williams?
Thank you, Patty, and welcome everyone for joining us today to talk about this initiative. And I know this is the second set of participation for a number of you. And so for those of you joining us the second time, additional thanks. We know it's a big time commitment and it takes you away from other obligations, but we want to make sure that we're very informed in how we implement this initiative by what we hear today and what we've heard at the other workshops and will continue to hear in the months moving forward. The Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities Initiative, or CVCI, as we call it, is a $500 million multi-year investment in communities that suffered the highest pollution burden. And many of you have invested in your time and energy to get these funds through the governor, through the legislative budget process, and we're so grateful for that. We want to make sure that we implement this precious funding successfully, and that we use those funds to benefit the communities that I described, the communities that are most vulnerable to environmental pollution. And every community, regardless of race, regardless of economic factors, should have the same access and the same quality of life benefits. But we know that's not happening right now. We're up against historical land use decisions that have prompted some communities to prosper, while others have languished and been left behind with a burden of pollution and toxic substances, bad air quality, other environmental factors. And we don't have a simple way to undo that, but we have to recognize it. We have to recognize those disparities, to act on them, and to restore communities to healthy and economically vital places where everyone can prosper. The CVCI moves the needle. It moves the state in the right direction toward environmental justice. Among other programs, CVCI will fund the Discovery and Enforcement of Dry Cleaners program and the Equitable Communities Revitalization Grant program. The Discovery and Enforcement program will investigate and clean up. We'll first find those contaminated sites, investigate them, and do what we can to move the ball forward on cleaning up contaminated properties. The Equitable Community Revitalization Grants will fund locally driven responses and actions to clean up brownfield sites. CVCI deploys multiple approaches to help restore communities to vibrant places. And as you'll hear, we're working to implement all of the CVCI programs using solutions that are identified, owned, and informed by people who live near or in these communities. The scale of cleanup needed in California is daunting. It's tremendous. But we, DTSC, all of the staff that you'll interact with today, and pretty much everybody who's attending today is committed to that work. And so with that shared commitment, we think we can move forward on restoring communities, not alone. And that's why we need to do this in partnership with all of you. What we hear today will be used to guide the implementation of this initiative. But it's just the beginning. There will be many more conversations as we go forward and many more opportunities for you to inform us and provide feedback as we implement the initiative. Last week, we had a conversation about the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant Program, and today we're going to focus on the Discovery and Enforcement of Dry Cleaning Sites program. As we develop and announce other CVCI programs and initiatives, we will engage you in the spirit of transparency and community partnership. We commit to hearing you, to understanding your perspective, and to finding opportunities to implement your ideas. Ultimately, we hope this space and the others that we create together will bridge the understanding and consensus about what path is best for us to move forward on. With these funds, you've entrusted us with the protection of California's most vulnerable people. And with your partnership and support, we know we can make the most of this tremendous moment, this opportunity together. Thank you. Patty?
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And Grant Cope is also with us this afternoon. And Grant Cope is Deputy Director of DTSC. Grant, would you like to pop in for some words of welcome as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. I certainly can't say anything better that describes the entire thrust for this program than the director. I would just add 2 points. When she talked about the program being multifaceted, the programs that are entrusted to us include Technical Assistance Program, which is specifically designed for us to work with members of the community around a site to both provide them with data and assistance in interpreting that data, but also to generate their own data, kind of a citizen science component. Now that's tremendously important to us because we want to see that our role in the community, we see our role in the community as being a partner that can provide the information that's needed for people to understand what we're doing and ultimately how we can better help members of the community. The other program that I'd mentioned that's in this same vein is the Community Benefit Agreement Program. And that is essentially an agreement between responsible parties that have financial resources and members of the community to provide benefits in that community where the site is located. That's essential. These communities are overburdened with contamination, have been for years. Cleaning up the contamination is part of what we do. Now with this program, we'll not only be able to relieve the community of that contamination, of those potential exposures, but we'll be able to actually work with the parties to increase the benefits going to the community in other ways. And that's just tremendously important. I think it's probably the best put as kind of the public servant mode. We are here to serve the public, and being provided with these tools, we hope to do even more for those that we serve.
Grant, thank you. And Dr. Williams, thank you so much. You just really gave us some important information about the new initiative, and we appreciate it. I'm Joan Isaacson. I am a facilitator with Kearns & West. We are a firm that provides impartial facilitation support for different public meetings and stakeholder groups like this. And we are here to support you in this meeting process to make it as productive as possible for everyone. Now, I have to tell you, I was so eager to hear from Dr. Williams and Grant Cope that I missed some important information on the first 2 slides. So I'm going to go back to those just because I want to make sure to impart that to you. So the first, I just want to let you know that the roundtables are being recorded and the recordings will be posted. Second, for those who are participating from the telephone, use the *9 to raise your hand when we're in those portions of the meeting. And we'll provide reminders about that, but I just want to let you know ahead of time. And also, I want everyone to know that we did ask about the need and ask for requests for language accommodations and did not receive any. I wanted to make sure everyone knew that we had gone that step because it's so important. Another important note is that we've turned on the closed captioning function in the Zoom platform, and to find it on your screen, it's usually in the toolbar on the lower right. So Mina, I think you can go on, and we'll now go to the slides. There we go. Excellent. So as you've heard and as you know, this is the second of two roundtables that are being conducted as part of the Cleanup and Vulnerable Communities Initiative. Last Tuesday, the roundtable focused on the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant program. And that was recorded. We're going to get that recording posted, and the slides are available. We heard a lot of good input from stakeholders about ideas for fine-tuning the application process, as well as ideas for meaningfully engaged community members in the application projects that move forward. So we really appreciate those participants, and we know that some of you who are with us today were involved in that roundtable, so thank you. But today we are focusing on the discovery and enforcement program for contaminated dry cleaning facilities. Here on the next slide is a little bit more information about today's focus. So we're here in part to expand understanding about this CVCI program focused on dry cleaners and those sites that have been contaminated by dry cleaning operations. And the most important part of this is hearing your input on how to prioritize those potentially contaminated dry cleaning facilities. And then also we need your input on the best ways to engage community members and other stakeholders in those processes for those sites and facilities. We're going to proceed in three parts. The first part will be providing some information about the discovery and enforcement program for dry cleaning facilities that are potentially contaminated or have caused contamination. And then well, from my perspective as facilitator, the most important part of this meeting is the small group discussions. So we're going to have a chance to get into smaller groups so we can have more meaningful and productive conversations, and then we'll report back out to the large groups. So everyone will get a sampling of the discussions that have occurred in the small groups. And then we'll wrap up with a couple of additional questions for you, and also providing some information about next steps. And then we have a short online questionnaire as well. Here on the screen are some guides that we have found to help virtual meetings be even that much more productive, where we can hear from as many of our participants as possible. We all know in virtual settings, it's a little bit tougher, but we found that these guides have helped. And so we're going to use the raise hand function and also the chat function when we get to Q&A and discussion. And so if you want to jump in and ask your question verbally, you'll just raise your hand and I'll be watching those, and then I'll call on you and you can unmute and join and talk with us about your question. Or you can just put it into chat. For some people, that's just easier. They're more comfortable doing that, and we'll be watching the chat box as well. It's also helpful if everyone really commits to making sure that all of our participants have equal opportunities to contribute in today's discussions. And what helps with that is if everyone keeps their input concise and focused, and that way we can travel as much ground as possible to hear from as many people and as many different ideas and issues and questions as we can. And then actively listening to understand perspectives is always an opportunity in a meeting like this. And also just taking the time to recognize that we're in this collaborative space together and to enjoy it because, you know, during our busy days, sometimes we don't have as many opportunities to really have important conversations like this. Again, just that note to the participants on the phone, use the *9 to raise your hand, and then the *6 to unmute when we get to those portions of the meeting. So we're going to start soon with providing that information about this discovery and enforcement of the contaminated dry cleaning facilities. But first, we want to do some introductions, and there's too many of our participants to do full roundtable introductions, but I still wanted to do something so we all have a sense of who's in the room. So we have a really quick activity for you. And Mina, if you can just click down. Okay, so some of you have probably done this before. What's going to happen is in a moment, I'm gonna ask you a question, and then I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And then everyone will type their answer into the chat box. And so we'll see a very sudden burst of activity with your answers to this question. And it's a really important question. And you'll see that this is a question truly is a way for us to get to know each other quickly. All right, Mina, you can click again. So here's our question. What priority are you working on this week? We know every single participant in this roundtable today is working on really important and critical projects and initiatives. So what's the priority you've been working on this week? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. And you can type your answers into the chat box. And they're starting to roll in. So affordable housing, PCE contamination at Warner Center, COVID vaccinations, just transition, building decarbonization. We got some more answers coming in. Public engagement strategy, getting ready for a presentation at an enforcement symposium. Delano Plume. Just an equitable transition. Dry cleaning cleanup, very pertinent to this topic. Protection of community and children's environmental health and environmental justice communities. So keep those answers coming in, and thank you for participating. It's the work that you do is so appreciated, and it's seeing all your answers is humbling because of the important work that you're doing and the contributions that you're making. We're going to go now to our first part of our roundtable, where our project team at DTSC is going to provide information about the discovery and enforcement of contaminated dry cleaning facilities. And you can go to the next slide. So here for today, to provide this information to us is Rafat Abbasi, who is a senior hazardous substance engineer at DTSC. And Rafat, I'm going to hand this over to you to tell us more about this important program of the CVCI initiative.
Thank you, Joan. I would like to say good afternoon to everyone. I would like to welcome you to the roundtable, and I would like to especially thank you to taking the time to listen to our presentation, and hopefully at the end of this presentation and this session, we can get some feedback from you, and hopefully we can take it back and incorporate into a process. Next slide, please. What I'm going to talk about, there are 4 main topics, but the most important topic that we want to talk to you about is the discovery enforcement site prioritization process. That's where we have designed this roundtable to get your feedback on. I'll talk to you a little bit about the purpose, why we are focusing on the dry cleaning site, and just a brief overview of the discovery enforcement program. Next slide, please. Yeah, so, Grant already talked about the 6 components of the CVCI, but today our focus is going to be on discovery enforcement program that has about $148 million allocated by the legislature. We're going to be focusing on about 7,500 dry cleaning sites, active and inactive. Next slide, please. So as I think Grant had indicated, the purpose of the dry cleaning program is to really investigate releases from the dry cleaning site. They use chemicals. I'm going to get into that a little bit. And a lot of these, they use chemicals that are potentially carcinogenic or have adverse health effects on human health and environment. And a lot of these facilities are located in high cumulative environmental and socioeconomic burden. And so we're using CalEnviro Screen to actually identify those sites so that we can target those sites in those communities. Next slide, please. Why focus on dry cleaning operation? Dry cleaning operation have been using for decades a chemical called perchloroethylene, which is potentially carcinogenic, potentially causes cancer. If it released to the ground, it can pose significant risk to public health and the environment. And a lot of studies have been done on these with respect to how many sites have posed a release. About 75% of the dry cleaning sites have caused contamination, either in soil vapor and groundwater. There are two other factors I want to focus in on. Next slide, please. And a lot of these sites, and you can see that, I'm going to show you in the map, a lot of these sites are located in communities that have higher environmental burden, exposure to airborne and drinking water contamination. And also, the same communities are also have high poverty rates and higher unemployment rates. That's why it's really, really important to focus on these. Next slide, please. As you can see, DTSC actually conducted a draft study, and we did a lot of research on how many sites are out there. It turns out that there are about 7,495 sites statewide, active and inactive dry cleaners. We have divided the site into east, west, and south. As you can see, about 822 sites in the east, which includes the Central Valley and the Sacramento area. 1,721 in the west, which primarily includes mainly the Bay Area. And then in the south, which include Los Angeles County, San Diego County, Riverside, and San Bernardino County. Primarily, most of our site here, about 5,000 of them, are in the south. Next slide, please. So there is a need for us to really narrow it down to make sure that we are able to address these sites with the available resources. With this new allocation, we should be able to do some of it, but we still have to have manageable number of sites at the end of the day to be able to deal with manageable workload for our staff. So the first screen, as I mentioned earlier, we're focused on vulnerable communities as defined by Cal EnviroScreen score. So according to the legislative guidance, we are focusing on sites that have about CES score of greater than or equal to 75th percentile or greater, right? So based on that screen, when you apply a 75 percentile screen, you are still looking at a lot of sites, about 1,615 sites, 35 of them are in the east, 124 are in the west, and about 12,256 sites are in the south. So that still gives you a lot of sites. So we still have to apply another prioritization criteria to be able to narrow this down a little bit further. Next slide, please. So after using the Cal EnviroScreen percentile, what we did is we actually look at each sites. We do a lot of rigorous research internally with DTSC staff, and we try to figure out how many of these sites are located to the sensitive receptor. So we kind of draw a line 50 feet to see how many sites we can come up with. As you can see on the map, there are 18 sites in the west, 18 in the east, and 77 in the south. We come up with a total of about 113 sites to start with. This includes two prioritization criteria, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more in the next slide. So we use the highest Cal EnviroScreen percentile in the south, in the east, and the west, and then apply the proximal distance criteria for sensitive receptors, 50 feet in our case. Okay, so we, as I mentioned earlier, 7,500 active and inactive dry cleaners. We also needed, since 70% of the site in the south, we actually had to have an equitable proportionate distribution across the site. So that's what we did, divided the site into 3 regions. Then we applied Cal EnviroScreen criteria. We had too many sites in the south, so we have to apply a highest CES percentile, 95 to 100% in the south. In the east, we had to apply 90 to 100 percentile. And in the west, about 80 to 95 percentile. We did not have any sites from 95 to 100 percentile in the west. And then after applying these criteria in each region, we were able to filter these sites out, look into what kind of proximal distance we had, 50 feet distance we applied for residential, schools, daycare, senior center, and the hospital. So each site was then went back and look at whether or not, there are residential communities located, schools located within these, daycare, senior center, and hospital. Each site were individually evaluated for the proximal distance of 50 feet for sensitive receptors. And then at the end of the day, we came up with a 13th site for discovery per year. This is a cyclical process. I'm going to let you know later on. This is a cyclical process. Every year, we're going to have to go through that to identify site per year. And then, I'm going to describe to you the whole process and you'll see where we're going with this. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of a distribution of these sites. You're looking at the cities in the panel on the right-hand side. Obviously, the California map with east, west, and south. And then you can see in the west, in the south, and the east, we have cities identified with a number of sites located. And as you can see in the south, most of these sites, as expected, are in city of Los Angeles, about 32 of them here. In Richmond, in the west, we have about 6, Oakland 5, and in east, we have Fresno and Stockton have the most sites. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the site selection process, the prioritization process is annual. So we have to go through it every year, select sites, and then go through the discovery process, do the investigation. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to figure out 113 site for discovery process. We are here. The red arrow indicates we are here. We are still very early in the process, and that's why we are here. We want your feedback on this process, the process that we have gone through. We want you to tell us whether or not there are any criteria there are that you want us to consider. And I'm going to get into the discussion question later on that specifies those feedback that we need from you. So once we have identified about 113 sites, we're going to have to perform phase 1 assessments, basically a record search. And once we have that evaluated, we're going to go through a discovery investigation. Based on the evaluation of the discovery investigation, we're going to have to evaluate what risk each site poses. And then based on the risk, we're going to initiate enforcement process. And if there is a need for us to do immediate response action, the department will be prepared to do that and implement it with the budget that's allocated by legislature. And if necessary, we will also continue to investigate these sites. So we'll have immediate response action if there's an elevated risk, and then we'll continue with further investigation and cleanups. So that's what our plan is. And throughout the process, and you look at the arrow down, the second arrow at the bottom, we continue to, this is the first step here, and we would like your feedback on it. And throughout this process, we would continue to engage with you and seek your input throughout the process. There is also an ongoing process right now that our team is working on, which is called the petition process. We have a model, we're trying to model this compared to the EPS process. The EPA has an NPL process, so that community members want to include a site in the discovery enforcement program, they can make a petition to the department. That process right now is being developed, and sooner or later we're gonna finalize it, and we're gonna let everybody know, if that process is ready for you to use. But we will let you know. Next slide, please. So just an overview of the site discovery enforcement process. As soon as we complete the site discovery investigation, we anticipate that out of 113 sites, and this is projection, we're estimating that about 65 of them may go into discovery investigation. And based on that, we're going to issue enforcement order to the property owners. If they comply with the order, the site, the DTSC staff will execute an order with them, and property owner will fund the investigation and cleanup. If they don't comply, the department will issue a notice of non-compliance, and at the same time will conduct ability to pay analysis. One of the things that I forgot to mention is most of these dry cleaners are mom and pop businesses, and a lot of times they don't have financial resources to do the investigation. So at that point, the department, in case of non-compliance, they agree to do it, we're going to sign an order with them, and they're going to do the investigation. If they are not economically viable, based on our evaluation, through the process that we call ability to pay analysis, we will make a determination whether or not the property owner is viable. If they are not viable, the department will figure out a way to use its fund to do the investigation analysis. Okay, and then of course, as you can see at the bottom, we have asterisks with cleanups, right? So some of you are very familiar with our process, some of you are not. The public engagement process is mandated by Health and Safety Code. That includes development of the community profile, mailing list, public notice, public comment period. That's mandated. We're going to do that as part of the cleanup process. But this process that we're going through right now, the roundtables and more to come in the future, that's outside of that process. So what I'm trying to say is that the department will continue to engage not only in the mandated activities that are required by the department to do, but also outside of that. So we're looking for a lot of opportunities to get public feedback outside of the cleanup process. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is discovery enforcement timeline, November, December 2021. That's where we are right now. Complete site prioritization, develop a list for the current year. Our current year is 2021-22, starts in July 1st and end in June 30th. So that's what we're looking at. Hopefully, as part of this process, we can get some feedback from you today and incorporate that in our site prioritization process. Once we have a finalized list, we're hoping by January to March of next year, we should be able to finalize contract, start discovery process, which includes investigation and then evaluation, whether or not the site poses a risk, and issue enforcement order. And then April to June 2022, the cycle continues. We're going to again start complete prioritization for next year. And your feedback today will be very much valuable for next year site prioritization process. And then we'll continue the enforcement process and so on and so forth. So this is kind of like 4-year plus 2 years program, and site prioritization process will happen every year. I mean, we're anticipating between April to June, we're going to be prioritizing the site and get into the system, sign contract, do the same thing every year. So we're going to come to you for feedback, and we're going to do debrief and see if the system, the public engagement process is working or not, how we can refine it further. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Next slide, please. And Joan, I wanted to ask you if you want me to go through the question again, these discussion question now, or you want to wait?
Yeah, Robert, why don't you just review these? Folks, these are the discussion questions that we'll discuss in the small groups when we get to that second part of our roundtable. But I think let's give everyone a preview, and then we're going to pause for some Q&A before we go to the roundtable, before we go to the breakout groups.
So you want me to read each?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Joan, for clarification. And what I wanted to do is go through discussion question 1, 2, and 3, and I want to provide some perspective on it so that you understand where we're coming from. So I'm going to read the question. I'm going to provide a little bit of explanation why we're asking that question. For year 2 of the Discovery Enforcement Program, what are your perspectives on DTSC considering site in areas that have lower Cal and bioscreen score than year 1, but have higher adverse impact to the communities? The reason we asked this question, as I mentioned in my presentation, we are focusing on the highest percentile of CES scores. That does not necessarily mean that a site pose the significant risk, right? We could actually go in a lower percentile, and there is a possibility that we find a site that had higher adverse impact to the communities. So right now, as a part of our prioritization scheme, we're not doing that. We're using the highest percentile and the proximal distance of 50 feet. What we're asking you to see if you want us to go to the lowest percentile and see if a site poses a higher adverse impact to the community. So that's the first question. The second question is, what are your recommendations for additional consideration to use in prioritizing sites in vulnerable communities? Are there any other consideration besides CS scores and the proximal distance that you think we should consider? That's what this question is all about, and we would appreciate if you can give us a feedback on it. The third question, in addition to the mandated public engagement process during cleanup, I just mentioned that to you during our previous slide. Public notice, public meeting, community update. What other engagement opportunities are important for the discovery enforcement process? As I mentioned earlier, we are absolutely mandated to go through during the cleanup process, do the public engagement activities as indicated here. But what other activities you could actually think we could do to get your feedback into the whole process outside of the cleanup process, or maybe additional input into the cleanup process? So that's what the third question is about, Joan. I think we are good right now.
Yeah,
right?
Thanks for previewing those. And everyone, we will review those questions, I think 2 more times before we actually do the discussion, because there's a lot to them. So don't feel like you have to remember everything right now. We do have time for Q&A, and we have some really good questions already in the chat box. So I'm gonna start asking these, and I know sometimes Rafat, it's helpful to be able to track. So we're gonna start at the question that's marked 235.
Oh.
From Florence Caribbean, and I'll pose them for you.
Okay.
Florence Caribbean asked a question about, do you have information on groundwater pollution from dry cleaning solvents?
The answer is
levels of dry cleaning solvents. Yeah, like tell us a little bit more about the situation of the contaminated groundwater.
So, well, thank you for that fantastic question, Florence. The answer is sometimes we do, Florence, and sometimes we don't. There are sites in our database that do not have any information. That's why we feel the need to do phase 1 discoveries. There are some sites we have a lot of information on. For example, there's a local agency doing the investigation in the next plaza, and or water board is working on sites from the Kenny corner from where we are located. So it depends. The answer is yes, if the other agencies are working on it, and even at times, DTSC is working on a site close by. So we have the ability to look at those sites and be able to identify whether or not groundwater is impacted or not. In addition to all of this information, we do have a spigot data built into the database and the GIS tool that the department uses for prioritization process. We do have some data from spigot, but a lot of that data is obsolete. It's not very recent. So hopefully I answered that question, Florence.
We have, I know I'm just checking for hands too, so I see a hand up. LaDonna, I'm going to take a couple more questions from the chat box, and then I'll come over to you. And Mina, I think we can cut the slides, and that way we can have better view of each other during the Q&A.
Yeah.
We can always refer back to them if we need to. Okay, so my chat box moved around. Okay, this is a really good question about the 50 feet. So when you're talking about the 50 feet from a potential site in terms of identifying sensitive receptors, the comment from Gina Thornburg is 50 feet seems arbitrary. How are things like slope, soil type, distance to groundwater, and other geophysical and hydrological criteria considered?
It's an excellent question, and it's the one that our team always talked about. So I appreciate that insight into it. Yes, it is arbitrary, but what we did is we figured that we will look at the closest receptors. Most of the time, we do not have a lot of information on these sites. And when you go back and recall one of my slides there, it talks about phase 1 investigation. And I think that's what it's all about. We will do phase 1 investigation that actually look at the regulatory records and provide information that would be helpful for us to make that determination. So hopefully going forward, we will have more information. As we get into discovery investigation, we will have all that information. So when the site gets into enforcement process, we'll have all that information we need to make an evaluation.
Okay. And Robina Sewell asked if the maps and locations would be available in the PowerPoint slides, and a response was already provided in the chat box that yes, we'll get the slides I have, and that will include the maps to all of our participants. There's a comment from Gina Thornburg about DTSC having missed many of the sites.
I'm sorry, what was that again? Can you repeat?
It was just a comment that DTSC has missed many sites.
Okay.
Okay, LaDonna Williams, let's go to you. I see your hands up, and please unmute and let us know your question or your perspective that you want to share.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. I have a couple of them. One is, does DTSC plan on paying communities for our participation in this? We are giving a lot of information through their surveys, through the comments that we make. You guys are taking notes. And in effect, we are partnering with you in this by providing this information. And so part of these community benefits should be, we should be paid for this time. It's a lot of time investment. It's important issues, absolutely, but communities should be paid for our time. But also, I was wondering, why did they separate the gas stations from dry cleaning? I noticed in the beginning when we were working on vapor intrusion issues, it was dry cleaners and gas stations. Now I notice it's just only dry cleaners, and many of the gas stations are located in these very low income, struggling communities. They have both. So why was there a separation?
So fantastic question, very insightful. And let me answer them one by one. So you talk about community should be paid for your input. I think Grant actually talked about community benefit agreements that are being part of this CVCI. One component of it, that set aside resources for community involvement where we have an RP on a site, right? So that's one. The other one is technical assistance grant. Those grants, that program, that component of the CVCI is being developed right now. We don't have it yet. And my guess, my take on that is that would also set aside some resources for community to partake in the process. So the answer is yes, absolutely yes. There are two components that I can think of are designed to provide resources to the community so that they can be compensated for the feedback that they provide to DTSC.
Okay, so will they plan on doing retro as well? Because if they're doing that in the future, we know that means we're looking at January, but we've got 5 meetings coming up. And even to this point, with the first meeting that we got information from, there was an additional 3 hours sharing it with the folks that we serve, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of time and investment in this.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I am not sure whether or not the program, those two components are designed to pay you retroactively, since they're not developed yet. So I can't speak to it right now. But I just want to let you know there are two components under the CVCI program that are designed to do that for you. Yeah. And then the next question about—
I would add to, just LaDonna, we're taking notes and reporting to DTSC. So everything that you say, all of your ideas and the ideas from our other participants are being documented for the team.
Okay. And I just, something else I forgot to add, it was a real quick kind of glance. I didn't realize the numbers were up, but on that wheel or pie chart that you guys had, it appeared that community had like $2 million, but when you look at the amount of money or millions that were designated to these other titles or initiatives, they appear to be much higher than what they were designating community. So I wanted to figure out if they're talking about transparency, equity, and partnering, then there needs to be a fair, equitable number that the community will benefit from.
Well, thank you for that comment, LaDonna. We'll take it back to our management. Thank you. Oh, so the second part of the question is gas station. So I need to respond to that. That's a very important question. LaDonna, you're absolutely right. Where we have a lot of these dry cleaners, we got a lot of gas stations. Unfortunately, The petroleum products are not under the purview of the department jurisdiction, so we cannot address them. Regional board already has the authority over them, and they have a lot of our dry cleaning sites that are located anywhere in the state. They have gas station around them, but when you look at the data, they have been basically reviewed, looked into, and overseen by regional board. So rest assured that those are addressed by regional board.
Okay, wait. So the petroleum is the water folks, the regional board water.
That's correct.
And then the dry cleaners is DTSC for soil.
Well, so the dry cleaners, well, the water board is also working on dry cleaner site as well. They are working on those sites as well. But we as part of the discovery enforcement program are going to focus on this, because there are, as you see, there are 7,500 of them. And I don't think that, what regional board has resources to address all of them.
Thank you.
Welcome. Great question.
So those of you who've been in meetings with me, one of the things I try to do during Q&A is make sure that we hear a question from everyone who's contributed, and then I'll go back and take the second questions that people have asked. So I'm going to jump to the question from Evelyn Nuno. It's timestamp 246 if you want to take a look. So Evelyn writes, I'm a little confused why DTSC is prioritizing dry cleaners. Maybe I need some clarification on how DTSC will address pollution, but my understanding is that this would go under air pollution and would fall under the AQMD jurisdiction. So another question about jurisdiction.
So I'm trying to find that question though. I just want to make sure.
It's 246.
246. 246. Oh.
Yeah. And if you can, we're going to have to move on to a small group. So if you can give us just a short answer, that'd be great.
Okay. So I'm trying to, So all the dry cleaners that you see around, they have AQMD permit. They do. So air pollution is a very, very big concern. So they are governed by the district's permit that are issued to each dry cleaners. But if a release has occurred from the dry cleaner, then it becomes my problem, TTSC's problem. So a lot of these, as I mentioned earlier in the slideshow, about 75% of them have caused release to either soil and groundwater. So once the release has occurred, it becomes a DTSC problem. So that's why we are focusing on dry cleaners.
Okay. We have a question from Paola Tirada Palazas, 253 is the timestamp. And she asks, how would this address contamination liability issues for small business owners who use Perk or hydrocarbons-based solvents to get a full cleanup and transition to a professional wet cleaning, a truer, safer alternative?
Oh, great question. So as I mentioned earlier, when I was describing the whole process, the department will make an evaluation. Once we have evidence of release, department issues an order, talk to the property owner, conduct economic analysis, what we call the ability to pay analysis within the department to look at whether the property owner or a small business is economically viable to pay for investigation and cleanup. And then if they're not, and if there is a release that requires immediate action, the department will use its own fund to conduct investigation and subsequently clean up.
Okay.
Follow up. You said the department will use its own funding to cover that up?
Yeah,
Okay.
We have a procedure to actually do that. So if there is a significant release and elevated risk, the department has to cross through threshold, non-compliance, and economic inviability, right? If we cross both those thresholds, the department will be ready to use the funds.
Thank you.
All right, I know we have questions that we haven't answered yet, and what DTSC has told me is that that they will take a look at these questions and get answers out, especially for those questions that haven't been answered yet. But there was a comment from Clara Johnson about, I just want to point this out. because it's on a different topic than we've addressed so far. So the dry cleaner may not own the building. Therefore, who is the responsible party? If more people are impacted, then they should have priority despite a lower score. And if a site is in an area with additional contamination, then the people that are being burdened with toxics from more sources should receive priority. So thanks for weighing in on that, Clara. And we're actually going to get into, in our small group discussions, some of these issues having to do with how to prioritize sites. So hold on to some of those thoughts. If you can do me a favor and put the slides back on, I want to orient our participants to the second and most important part of our roundtable. I'm going to let you all know too, as we're gearing up towards the second part of our roundtable, is that these meetings that are happening as part of the Cleanup Vulnerable Communities Initiative, CVCI, this is just the beginning of the engagement that's going to happen for these different programs. So part of the initiative is expanding meaningful community engagement. And so know that this is just the beginning. And I also just want to say that our project team, in working with DTSC on the prep for these roundtables, worked really, really hard to make sure that we were asking questions that would yield your input and comment that then the DTSC team, Rafat and others, can then take back and really use to inform their next steps. So these questions have been designed to be very intentional so that we're really they're committed to making sure that what we're hearing in these meetings, they can address and use your input. So let's go to the next slide. On this slide, we've got our process for these small groups that are going to happen in just a moment. So the first step, it will be that you will be automatically transported to a small group in a breakout room here on Zoom. You aren't going to have to find anything to click. It's just going to happen automatically for you. When you get there, you're going to meet your facilitator. There will also be a DTSC observer. The role of the DTSC observer is to listen. So there's some people who wanted to make sure that they were part of the groups, and then they'll be able to help take what they're hearing back to their colleagues at DTSC. Of course, like I said, we are preparing a summary and documenting notes. So you're going to meet your facilitator. Step 3 will be the discussion of the questions, and we'll give those to you again when we get to the breakout rooms. And then you're going to prepare with your facilitator for reporting back. The facilitators will report back, but they will review with you what they're going to report back. The reporting back will not be comprehensive. We're just looking for a sampling of the discussions so that we all get just to hear a little bit of what was going on in the different rooms. And then we will be automatically transported back into plenary for reporting back. So here are the discussion questions. Once again, they are for year 2 of the Discovery and Enforcement Program. What are your perspectives on DTSC considering sites in areas that have lower calovirus screens compared to the year 1 sites, but have a higher adverse impact to the communities that they're located in? The second question is going to be, what are your recommendations for additional considerations to use in prioritizing sites and vulnerable communities? And some of that was already surfacing in the chat box just a couple of minutes ago. And then our third question for you has to do with community engagement. In addition to the mandated public engagement process for cleanup of dry cleaning sites, what other engagement opportunities are important for the discovery and enforcement process? You all are experts in conducting really effective community engagement. And so please share what you think is going to work best for the discovery and enforcement process for the dry cleaning sites. Next slide. We have Prince and West facilitators in each of our group. We were going to run 4 groups, but we're now going to run 3 to make sure we have really optimal sizes in each group for robust conversation. And I think with that, we can go. So facilitators, are you ready? Okay. I'm gonna ask the tech team to take us away. Okay. Does it look like everyone's back? It's hard to tell on the screen. I will just have to trust technology and assume that everyone's back. I was part of one of the groups. We had some great discussion and new ideas were surfacing in response to the questions. And I'm sure that the same thing was happening in the other small groups. We're going to report back, and then we have a couple of more questions for you. We just want to get as much input from you as possible before we wrap up. So thanks for your patience with that. But we'll end right about 4. So we're going to do some reporting back. And as I said before, the reporting back isn't going to be comprehensive. It's going to be more the opportunity to get a sampling of the discussions heard in the other the discussions that were happening in the other rooms. And the question we're going to report back on is, what are your recommendations for additional considerations to use in prioritizing sites in vulnerable communities? And of course, those are prioritizing dry cleaning sites and facilities in vulnerable communities. So, so facilitators are going to report back, and you coordinate with your groups on what you're going to report back on, and hopefully like limited it to about three themes. That's the plan. So Ben, I'm going to ask you to go first.
All right. Well, whatever my group was called, Group 1, that's must-see recording. So we had a fantastic conversation. It was a real blessing to share it with folks. We had kind of three things that I think we captured at a high level. One is really focusing in on cumulative and compounding impacts. And so folks talked about Superfund sites and groundwater contamination, where there's a concentration of permitted facilities, things like that, right? So really looking at that cumulative impact. The second one is what I'll name as proxies. But I thought there was some real brilliance out of the group that talked about what are some of the other kind of data indicators that could be used by DTSC: low performing schools, low tree canopy, concentration of low income and houseless communities, concentration of things like cancer clusters and other health impacts. So what are those other data indicators that could be used and overlaid? And then the third is really, looking at where these sites or this issue has been already prioritized by community, really with the hope that there's engaged community that allows DTSC to connect more intentionally. It also offers an opportunity to connect and collaborate with other agencies that may be working in these same spaces and places. And then I'll give a shout out, Ms. Clara, who brought PACE Protocol for Assessing Community Excellence and Environmental Health back into the fold, and really seeing that as an opportunity to help invest in community, build capacity in community, and help continue to prioritize issues. So thank you to my colleagues that joined our conversation.
And thank you to you, Ben. Christian, do you want to go next, and then followed by Ivana?
Yes. So the 3 themes that came up from our conversation, start off with the first one. Prioritizing sites that are looking to redevelop into affordable housing. So that was the first point that came up from our discussion. The second recommendation came with prioritizing communities that are already involved with DTSC, working with communities that already been involved with site cleanups and have done some of that legwork with staff. And then the third theme that came up in recommendation was prioritizing bad actors. So focusing on sites and locations that have a lot of violations and looking at these sites as priorities. There's also a comment regarding working with cities, especially looking at databases for dry cleaning sites that identify sites that were established before 1982 as well, which are some of the existing database sites that we have for DTSC.
Great. Thanks, Christian. Ivana.
Thanks, Christian and Ben. So I think we have some pretty complementary ideas here. Thinking about, one of the themes here was looking at communities where there are multiple pollution sources, really focusing on, where there is a plethora of pollution sources. And I think that sort of complements, identifying, there are indexes out there that identify vulnerabilities. And one that was mentioned was one by an author, Susan Cutters. And we'll see more through the recording. But another quintessential piece is the understanding that DTSC knows the communities, knows which communities are the most vulnerable, and therefore should go out and sort of be on the ground, do tours, be engaged in that way with communities that are most vulnerable. So those are the top line. And there was also this one idea about connecting the municipalities and resulting that things that are uncovered through CEQA processes, environmental processes, getting that information channeled into DTSC's hands, and also water boards as well would be very, very useful. Those are the headlines out of the group I was in.
Thanks to all three facilitators, and definitely some common themes around, perhaps prioritizing those sites in those areas where there's already existing cleanup activity with DTSC, where the community is involved, prioritizing for affordable housing, looking at other indicators. And Ben, you had another term other than indicator that I really liked.
We talked about proxies.
Proxies, yeah. I think that's a really descriptive term. Like I said, we have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. So I'm going to keep this moving to be respectful of all of your time. So we have 2 poll questions, and they're just going to pop up in your screen, and then you can select an answer. So let's take the first question. Okay, so you should be seeing it soon. DTSC is targeting dry cleaning facilities for the Discovery and Enforcement Program. What other types of businesses are of environmental concern to you? And you can choose up to 3 answers on this one. There are more answers down below on the screen. So what you do is you take that gray bar on the right side and click on it and just drag it down to see the other answers. And there's an other answer. So if the business or use that is on your mind isn't in the list, you can just write it in the chat box right now, and we'll pick it up that way. So we've got auto repair shops, dismantlers, hazardous waste transporters, lots of choices here for this answer. We'll pause for another half minute to give you a chance to choose answers. And again, you can select up to 3. Tech team, if you can push the magic button so we can see the answers. And someone just put a question in the chat box. I think probably someone from DTSC could answer it pretty quickly. All right, so for those of our participants today who responded about other types of businesses that are of concern, environmental concern, and to you, chemical manufacturers look like the top rated use, followed by auto repair shops, metal plating, and then dismantlers were also identified, electronics recycling. So this is helpful for DTSC to understand if they're starting in their Discovery and Enforcement Program to look at other businesses, what are those priorities that should be considered according to community leaders like all of you. We have another poll question for you. It'll come up in just a moment. So the question should be on your screen now. And for this one, you just choose one answer. And the question is, what information provided to you was the most useful for you to understand the site selection process for the discovery and enforcement program? So this type of question helps DTSC in thinking about how to effectively communicate on programs like this one to community leaders and community members. So was it the PowerPoint that was especially helpful, or maybe it was the one-page document about the discovery and enforcement program? There were different informational pieces that were emailed out, links, the links were provided. Was it the website that you found most helpful in understanding the discovery and enforcement program? I'll hold a minute and let you ponder on this, and then we'll report the answers. Team, let's show the results of this one. For this group who's answering, it looks like the PowerPoint presentation and then the content on the website page was most helpful. We appreciate you helping provide responses to that. It helps the public involvement team, like I said, to better understand and keep honing in how they're providing information to community members. Okay, this is the last question for today. But it's an important one. And so what DTSC wants to know is, how do you want to be involved in the discovery and enforcement program moving forward? You can just type your answer into chat. It's really easy. As you've heard, what we're experiencing today with this roundtable is really the beginning of the engagement that's happening with the Clean Up Vulnerable Communities Initiative. And therefore, knowing how you want to be involved is going to help shape and form what DTSC does next. We have a comment from Gina Thornburg that she'd like to help identify sites. There's a comment from Celeste Wolf about staying involved, attending these types of webinars, and then disseminating information to the community. DTSC working with the LA Environmental Justice Network was identified as a next step for being involved. You can go ahead and keep thinking about that and writing in answers. And we're going to provide some wrap-up information, but we're also going to be putting in a link to a very short questionnaire into the chat box. And so after we do the quick wrap-up, if you can click on the link and fill out our questionnaire, it'd be most helpful. Again, I know we're asking a lot of you, but we're trying to just solicit as much of your wisdom and your experience and your input as possible while we have you. So, Rafal, I think you're going to review the next steps.
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. We will post roundtable forum and summaries and recording next. And I think we don't have the time frame on that right now. hopefully shortly. Follow up and share what we heard and look into implement from these roundtables. So a lot of this feedback I heard, and I have jotted down my notes, and I want to make sure that once I have the summaries from the small group discussion, I would like to take it back to our management and see how we can incorporate those suggestions. So we thank you for that. Develop ongoing communication, engagement opportunity. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue to do that. Roundtable forums like this are going to be following based on where we are on the process, especially in the discovery enforcement program. Create public engagement mechanism to allow for equitable stakeholder engagement. Absolutely right. This is what Dr. Williams actually articulated and Grant indicated early on. So we're all committed to that. Next. And then establish ongoing partnership to keep people and communities involved and informed regarding cleanup and vulnerable community initiative. Yes, we are continue to evolve our public-facing webpage, and I think you're going to see a lot of features involved in it that continue to partner, and not only as part of this forum, but the future forum. We're going to create that ongoing partnership with you all and others who might be interested in our process. And then ramp up contact database. Yeah, the more people we have participate in these roundtables, the better it is. So please spread the word so that we create a robust database and we can reach out to more people. So that would be great. And then, and now please take a short questionnaire to provide additional input on community engagement. The last question is open-ended, so you can share additional input. Thank you so much, Joan.
Sorry, I was on mute. Rabina had a comment about invitation-only events. I know that DTSC plans to do broad community engagement, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that. So there will be. DTSC wanted to have these smaller groups for a focused discussion, but broader community engagement open to all community members is planned. So keep on the lookout out for those announcements. The questionnaire should be in the chat box now. There it is, dropped in by John Bowie there. And so I'm going to give everyone a moment or two to click on there. And once it looks like everyone's been able to click into the survey, then we'll probably wind down the virtual platform. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you at our next meeting. Stay tuned for that information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.